everybody, welcome back to the Vinyl Rewind podcast. I am so very excited because here in the studio I have a living legend, record producer, published author, Joe Boyd. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
And as much as I would love to talk about your past work, we're not here to talk about that today.
Well, you know, you can talk about anything you like. I mean, the vinyl is a magic word for me.
Yeah.
So although I love the fact that people are kind of buying turntables and they're really into it and all, I'm a little cynical about the boom because...
Oh, tell me.
Well, because so many of the vinyl records the new ones that cost all that money, are mastered from 16-bit, 44K digital masters. So it's really like a CD pressed onto vinyl. And it's only when you get the higher end or the original analog source as the source of the master sound that you're actually getting something better than what you're going to get by streaming.
Right. No, that's a great point. Yeah. I mean, I notice even now CDs are starting to make a comeback, even just because the prices are so high now for vinyl. It feels like the pandemic just did a number on manufacturing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
But
yeah, you bring that up. I mean, Rhino. I don't know if you've caught on to Rhino High Fidelity.
Well, I've heard about, there's cut from original analog master tapes. There you go. And it's great that people are actually making a point of what the source is. Because in the early years of this revival, you never knew what you were getting.
Yeah. Exactly, and even like Mobile Fidelity got in big trouble because they weren't disclosing. They were just letting people assume it was all analog sourcing.
Right.
And then you have other people like Analog Productions. It's in their name, and they let people know what they're doing.
Is Mobile Fidelity any relation to Audio Fidelity?
Oh, I'm not familiar.
I think audio.
Well, Mobile Fidelity, that has the original master recording strip across the top. They've been around since the 80s.
Okay. Yeah, that's a different company than Audio. Audio Fidelity was I write about it in this book. Yeah. The fact that the guy who ran Audio Fidelity was obsessed with bossa nova, and he was the guy that rented Carnegie Hall and brought Joao Gilberto and Sergio Mendes and Tom Jobim and all these people to New York for the first time, and kind of launched the bossa nova explosion in America with this one crazy night at Carnegie Hall.
Wow. Okay, that's another place I'm going to go when I get my time machine.
Yeah.
We'll go there first, then maybe hit up Woodstock, Monterey Pop. But we're here. Well, okay, so you brought up your book, and it's a fantastic book, and it's where do you even begin with something like this? But I hope for my viewers and listeners, you can kind of give the cliff notes of what this book is.
Sure. Well, I mean, there were a number of triggers that set me off on this crazy journey that took me 17 years to write. I finished White Bicycles, which was about making music in the 1960s, and people said to me, "So, when will we get the book about the 70s?" I said, "Never." I hated the 70s. I didn't hate the 70s, but nothing good really happened to me, or there wasn't a story that I could tell about the 70s. But I liked writing. I liked and enjoyed traveling around and talking, and and so at home I have these bookshelves full of books on music, biographies of Miles and Louis Armstrong and Jarvis Cocker and the Rolling Stones and all, from all kinds of shades, but almost all Anglo-American music. And, and there's a great, fantastic library of new journalism, gonzo journalism, Nick Tosh's, Peter Guralnick. These guys have done fantastic work documenting our musical culture.
Yeah.
But over the horizon, mostly academic works that are quite specialized and quite difficult to for the average reader.
Yeah.
And I just felt like there's so many great stories outside of our normal scope. And people know this music. I mean, you know, people have bought Ladysmith Black Mambazo records, they've bought Bossa Nova records, they've bought Latin dance music, they've bought Balkan, the Mystère de Bois Bulgare. You know, they bought this stuff. But you ask people, where does that come from? What's the cultural background? Who are the personalities behind this? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
And so I set out with this, you know, the hubris to take on the idea of trying to bring the kind of storytelling, the kind of vivid personalities and memorable incidents from over the horizon that have already been accomplished in our own music. You know, the stories like Elvis turning up to do a demo for his mother's birthday to Sun Records and everything that extends from that. There are stories like that all over the world. You know, Tony Allen, one of the world's greatest drummers, getting a subscription to Downbeat and getting a guide, Max Roach's guide to playing the hi-hat, you know, in the mail. Yeah. And then practicing all this stuff and redefining music with the way he used the hi-hat. You know, there's so many stories like this.
Yeah. I like, for me, the thing that came up was give credit where it's due. Like, that's what you've done in this book. And it's just, and like you said, it's, I think what really gripped me was the way that it's written. It's not like this, you even say it in the preface of, it's not an academic book, although, you know, technically I think it could be.
Right.
But in the fact that it is very simple, it's conversational type writing. Like, I feel like you're talking to me the whole time, and you do here and there add your own anecdotes where appropriate, but it is easily digestible. Like, it's just, wow, that was how many pages I just finished? And what I really love too, it's not just about the music, but it's everything that informs the music. Like, it's the political climate, the economic, like how people lived, that informs this. And it you know, luckily I found the playlist, the official playlist for the book. But before that, I was like, what is this song? I got to hear this song. And
well, I mean, the playlist is something actually my wife Andrea put together. And I am, when I finish editing the audiobook, which is almost done, I'm going to start with a web page where, as you read the book, every piece of music you can go to a link.
That's fantastic.
And you'll be able to see or hear what I'm talking about. But I think for most people, I mean, you know, people know their way around YouTube these days. Right. You can see a name that you don't know what does he sound like? Right. Just go there and click and find it. You know, it's so many people have told me that's the way they read the book. They've got, you know, the book on one side of the desk and the...
Yeah, you need to. It's like I remember reading Tolkien, like I would have the book, Lord of the Rings, and then a dictionary. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but it's just like, it's musical knowledge. It's like, even if, you know some of it, you're not going to know all of it. And you might as well listen to the stuff you already know, just so you can hear the details of, like, oh, I see where he's coming. You know, you know, they took this from that, and then that led to this. Right. And it's just, congratulations, really. It's sorely needed, a book like this. And then I wonder if you could tell me, like, I think you kind of touched on it. People were sort of expecting something else from you, but like, why did you want to take this on? Because this is a a hefty book, and it's not an easy task to write a book.
No, but I didn't realize, if I'd known when I started that it would take me 17 years, I might not have started it. But
17 years? Wow.
But I didn't do it nothing but that.
Right.
During the time, but I just, I don't know, it just seemed to me that's, you know, during the time I was finishing and publicizing White Bicycles, a few thoughts came to mind. You know, I discovered certain things, like I thought about the misunderstandings that existed about Graceland, about what that music was, what it represented. Everybody thought, oh, it's all black South African music. Buying that stuff, we're really putting our behind Mandela and getting him out of jail, and it's all in the one direction, against the Boers and apartheid and in favor of Mandela, when in fact that music was very Zulu, and the Zulus were not so much behind Mandela. Many of them were actually fighting against the ANC, and Zulu music was considered tribal and backward by many of the young ANC comrades, and so it wasn't, nothing is as straightforward and simple as much of the Western media presents things. And so I thought, well, that would be a good thing to tell people. So a lot of it, the choice of what I cover in the book is basically what's known. There's fantastic stories about Rebetiko and Fado and, so many different types of music around the world, but I focused on the music that was the best known in the West.
Gotcha.
That people know the music, it's familiar to them, but they don't know where it comes from. They don't know who those people are. They don't know what political pressures tried to prevent that music from happening. I mean, there's so much history of music as defiance, music as identity to survive oppression. And I don't make a big deal of that, but I think those stories emerge to people, how, this incredibly beautiful music from the Congo emerged out of unbelievable brutality, and that's a sort of a story I felt I wanted to tell.
How exactly does one begin something like this? Like, is it one of those things, like you start writing chapters and like a couple years later you go back, be like, oh yeah, I forgot I wrote that? Or is it like all over the place and then with an editor you kind of compile it to something?
I think I pretty much went chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
There was a couple of times where I would write a chapter and then a year or two later I'd go back, read it and think, oh no, I got to rewrite this.
Yeah.
But mostly I would finish a chapter and then pretty much not touch it once I'd go over it again and again. And I do remember a nice moment where because first I would do a lot of reading and take notes with codes. I had a little code symbols system.
That's cool.
For filing things together so that, something from a history book combined with something from a pop music book would end up in the same file in my computer.
Yeah.
If they're about the same subject, And I was reading a biography of Malcolm McLaren. And because I wanted to know, because I think I remembered hearing somewhere that he used many of the same musicians that Paul Simon used on Graceland 2 years earlier. And that was kind of an intriguing fact. So I picked up this biography of Malcolm McLaren to try and figure out how he got there and how that all worked. And the writer made some allusion to the fact that his idea to start this sort of folk dance, hip hop thing that he came up with.
That song is so weird.
That because he got kind of bored managing Bow Wow Wow, that it was sort of like, it was like they didn't respond to any of his big ideas, that he had. And he was kind of bored with, dealing with the day-to-day management of this group. And this idea, Malcolm McLaren was bored. That's how this all begins, with him being bored. And it's like sort of represents us, Western culture. We were a bit bored. And that's how, it was like a low pressure zone in weather. And so things from afar are pulled in when there's a low pressure zone. And for years, in the wake of Elvis and Little Richard and Stones and Beatles and Dylan and all this great stuff in the early 70s, Western pop music was a high pressure zone. There was so much going on. There was so much great creativity. There was not really room. I mean, Marley forced his way in with reggae, and Santana forced their way in with Latin rock or whatever. But it was a pretty full, complete youth culture that was incredibly creative. And to me, the end of the 70s, with the rise of punk and the rise of disco, started creating more of a low pressure zone. And I don't know, I just loved that sentence. Malcolm McLaren was bored, and that was the first thing I wrote. And I said, that's going to be my first, the way the book starts.
Yeah.
And I never changed it. From then on, it was like always, that was the sort of hook that the book hung from. And I never changed that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that story. Thank you for telling me that. Because sometimes as a writer, it's just that first word or first sentence can be so difficult, almost to the point of crippling, where it's just like, I'll put it off or something. But I mean, it sounds like you had it from the beginning, and it just really was your through line, and I think that's really beautiful.
And then I've known Paul Simon for many years, but not well. I mean, we're not like friends or anything, but I met him in a British folk club in 1966 or something, and we run into each other occasionally, and I'd had this extraordinary run-in with him at a party. We have some mutual friends in London. I went to a party they had, and there was Paul. And, oh, what are you up to, Paul? Oh, I just got back from Johannesburg. I've been working with these South African musicians. Really? That's a bit odd, you know. And I was quite protective of my Ladysmith records. You know, I thought, nobody else has these. I'm like I'm a vinyl collector. Like, you know how arrogant vinyl collectors are. Like, I've got 3 Ladysmith LPs. You know, nobody else has that. And he's telling me, well, I'm recording Ladysmith up at Abbey Road tomorrow. And really? And so I'm very skeptical in a polite way, but he could tell that I was a bit like, come on, Paul, you know, you can't, you know. And he then said, come here. And he took me over to the corner of the room, and there were all these people standing around chatting, cocktail party.
Right.
And we sit down next to the hi-fi, and he gets out a cassette, and it's all the backing tracks.
Wow.
From Graceland. And he slips it into the player. We're sitting next to a speaker. He puts it on, turns it up. Nobody pays any attention in the party.
Right.
Me and Paul are sitting there, and he's playing me like 6 backing tracks from Graceland and singing the words into my ear.
Whoa! Wow!
and at the end, he turns to me and he says, "You think it'll sell?" And anyway, so then that was 86 or 85. And then 20 years later, or 25 years later, I emailed him and I said, you know, could we talk? I'm writing this book, could we talk? And he said, I'm so tired of talking about Graceland. You know, I really don't want to talk about Graceland anymore. And I said, well, I just want to ask you a couple, you know, it won't take long. And he said, well, okay, we can talk for 20 minutes. Here's my number, you know, call me. We talked for 3 hours. You know, he wouldn't stop talking. I mean, you know, it was great. And the great revelation that I got from it was, I mean, many great revelations from the conversation, and hence the title in a way. That was the thing that clinched asking him his permission to use the lyrics from Under African Skies as a kind of motif of the front of the book. In 1971 or 2, he loved Jimmy Cliff, and he loved Israelites. Yes. And he had this song that he'd done with Simon, with Garfunkel, and called Why Don't You Write Me? And he thought, he was never that satisfied with the way that they'd done the song, and he thought maybe it would work well as a reggae. And he booked Dynamic Sounds in Kingston, and booked a rhythm section, a great rhythm section, and flew down to Kingston and taught them the song, and they said, it doesn't really work. And they then gave him a lesson in Jamaican music history. They played him ska, and then they played rock steady. Right. And they taught him about the one drop, and they showed him where it had got to by that time. Right. And he realized that these were masters. he was in the presence of greatness, that these were musicians of like stratospheric level of brilliance, and that he just could not leave Kingston without something. And so, but he didn't have a song.
Yeah.
So he just laid down a couple of chord changes. They figured out a kind of structure, and they just began recording tracks. And they spent the whole rest of the day recording tracks around these chord changes. And then he took the tape back to New York, put it on his kitchen, car, whatever, wherever he was going, he just listened to it. And about 2 months later, the lyric to Mother and Child Reunion came to him, and he put it on and recorded it, top 5 record. So fast forward 15 years, 14 years to Johannesburg, he's there with the same idea, just do one track.
Right.
And then he realizes he's in the company of masters, and he does the same thing he did in Kingston. He just lays down tracks. And that's what, to me, is so great about the way Paul Simon works with music from abroad, is he starts with the rhythm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about the rhythm. And that's what I don't like about a lot of what Peter Gabriel has done, a lot of other fusion people. They put down some sort of middling, kind of slightly exotic, but basically Anglo-American rhythm, and then add the exoticism on top. To me, it's like the peanut butter and jelly sandwich falling the wrong way down on the floor. It's the wrong, it's upside down. It's like what is so genius about other cultures' music usually is rhythm. You can do any song you want over this rhythm, as long as you stick to this rhythm, then you've got something absolutely brilliant and original that makes people excited to move their behinds in a different way. And anyway, that's my pet theory, whatever. And that's why the title, and that's why the through line is rhythm.
I mean, I feel like, especially when you talk about dance, like salsa, cha-cha-cha, tango, it's like almost always, it's like always predicated on the rhythm, like the certain style of how it's played, reggaeton, all of that. It's all, it makes total sense to me. It's just like you paint a very clear picture.
And it's also one of the things that's sad in, I mean, some of the way people could read this book as being elegiac, because I think there used to be in many cultures, including American culture, at the Palladium and all the big dance halls of the 40s and 50s and 60s, craving for difficulty. Like, if you're going to dance the mambo, let's learn all the most complicated steps. Let's get really good at it. Let's learn all the really subtle moves and show them off and be better than the other guys at doing this. And over the course of the 70s and 80s, and people got less interested in mastering difficult steps. And now, so much dance music is everybody's just dancing, not as a couple, but kind of individually.
Line dancing.
Well, line dancing still has all those. We're going to try and go see some in Austin when we get there.
Okay, But I mean, like, some of it is simplified. I understand that.
Yeah. But I mean, like raves.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yes.
You don't see, large rooms full of people doing complex Latin dance the way you did at the Palladium in 19.
Right. Well, I forget, I think it's at the Palladium itself. It has that very wide shot of just that floor just packed with people, I think doing the Balboa or something. Everyone's just so packed together. It's crazy. Like, then the band's almost inconsequential. Yeah. It's all about the dancing.
But also, so many of the musicians that I've talked to or I've read interviews or learned about see their music as a dialogue with the dance floor. Like, they pick up the intensity when the dancing gets hot.
Right.
And the dancers respond. And this goes right back to early 19th century Havana and 18th century Haiti, you know, the way that these African musicians who were used to doing this. I mean, you know, there's, what's his name, Chernoff's book about the time he spent in Ghana as a drummer, and the way that drummers in a village dance would interact with dancers.
Right.
Because he'd learned how to play drums in this drumming ensemble in this village. And then one day the guy, his master, in the middle of a thing, started shifting the rhythm into an unfamiliar pattern that he slightly threw him. And he said, "Why'd you do that?" And he said, "Oh, well, there were some dancers from the next town came in, and I know they dance a bit differently."
Wow.
And so there's this interaction, which is what I'm saying is lost with the machines and the click tracks.
The drum machines.
Yeah, that interaction between the stage and the dance floor is something that you find in the past. But now with DJs and machines, you don't really, I mean, you do in a way. I mean, I'm sure that there are DJs who respond to the mood, they respond to what people are looking for, but not on a minute-to-minute.
Right, not to that detail.
Yeah, not to that detail, no.
Did you ever get into Damon Albarn's work?
I know Damon, and I know his work, and he's a very interesting guy and a very conscientious guy, and he's done some wonderful things. I mean, he was a huge sponsor of Tony Allen in the years after he left Fela Kuti. He gave him lots of work with all kind. Every time Damon had a project, he would hire Tony. And you know, my only problem is I think he's very often a lot of his stuff is very programmed, or at least. Right. And Tony was a little frustrated sometimes.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, I knew Tony. I was his music publisher.
Yeah.
And he would tell me that he liked a challenge, and it was a challenge to work with a programmed thing. But after a while, it got kind of boring. And he really loved, most of all, playing without earphones, without anything going on except his dialogue with the bass player, with the dancers, with the, you know, that was what he loved. And, but yeah, there's all kinds of ways of looking at it. I just have my own particular way. And it's, in a way, I've kind of piled up all these great stories as a way to sneak in my prejudices.
I think you're entitled to it.
Yeah.
When you make a book this great, I think it's only natural to do that. There's so many amazing little tidbits when you start going heavy into research mode, and it's great that you were able to put so many of them in this book. And I think that's going to be, you know, one of the many carrots that keeps readers going along. It's like, okay, what else has he uncovered?
Well, one of the things that one of the nice little stories that's in there that might appeal to your audience.
Yeah.
I talk about the music of Senegal, and in the music of Senegal, there are two figures who stand out as pioneers and guides, in a way, initiators, people who inspired and produced the greatest music to come out of Senegal. And they were both obsessive vinyl collectors.
Yes.
You know?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, the guy who ran the Star Band, where Youssou N'Dour first performed as a 16-year-old, he had this gigantic collection of Latin music, and he would take the band to his house and play them. Yeah. And teach them, you know, say, why don't you cover this tune or use this melody as a fit with our wall-off folk music, whatever. And it all grew out of his collection. Then you had Ibrahima Silla, who started the Sillaphone label, the Sillart label, which covered all of Africa, all of Francophone Africa. He was the biggest label all during the 70s and 80s. And he started out as an obsessive collector. and started a record store in Paris that sold Caribbean and African vinyl.
Awesome. Yeah.
And he just loved vinyl, and he was the guy who, and I think I love stories because I'm a collector.
Yeah.
And I love stories where collectors end up being initiators, aren't just archivists, but actually use their collection as a springboard to initiate something new.
Right.
So I've sought out people like that in the book a little bit.
Well, as much as I appreciate that we live in a digital age, and it's like going back to what we talked about earlier, being able to just search for these relatively obscure songs prior to the internet, it's just great to have that aspect. But I think sometimes you can get overwhelming, or it's just a lot of noise. And it's just like when you're digging through a bin of records, a cover you've never seen before catches your eye, and suddenly you're on this rabbit hole. So like I see both sides. I do both. But I can only imagine like pre-internet. I can't imagine. I was living pre-internet, but like pre-internet, trying to like, so much of it was music on vinyl. That was the only way, unless someone came to town, but that wasn't always the case.
And one story that I don't tell in this book, but actually I think I told it in White Bicycles, but I still love the story. It kind of illuminates what you're talking about. I read an interview many years ago with Keith Richards talking about when he first got together with Mick and they were forming the early versions of the Stones, and they shared a cheap flat in Fulham, and they had one little record player. And he said they only had one blues record, and it was an EP.
Oh, wow.
Which I know. I used to have this EP.
Yeah.
It's on the Stateside label, which used to license American R&B product for England.
Yeah.
And it had 4 tracks, 2 on one side, 2 on the other. And it was licensed from the Nashboro label. And it was Slim Harpo, 2 tracks of Slim Harpo on one side and 2 tracks of Lazy Lester on the other side. And there's a sound. I think they used the same rhythm section, Slim Harpo and Lazy Lester. It was recorded in Nashville.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
And there's a feel to that music. It's very laid back. The singing is a drawl that is common to Slim Harpo and Lazy Lester, a type of harmonica playing. There's a certain feel in that music. And I always thought, if you listen to the early Stones, a lot of blues covers, they sound like that. They sound like Slim Harpo and Lazy Lester. And that gave them an identity, that gave them a style. And you just try to imagine Mick and Keith in that flat in Fulham with Spotify.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, if they had every Howling Wolf record, every Son House record, every Robert Johnson record, every Albert King record to listen to, would their sound have been so distinctive? Would their sound have been so original? Would they have become the Rolling Stones? I don't think so. I think that the narrowness of what was available on that technology helped create the individuality of many of those groups from that period. I don't know, just a theory.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking is just there's something that happens when, because I was born in 1982 and I grew up having only so many CDs, and you play them so many times and things start to reveal themselves over, like Weezer's Blue album's like one of my favorites, and that's one of those ones like it took me maybe 100 listens before I knew that there was another element that I couldn't hear because my stereo system didn't have the right bass amplification.
Okay.
Because it was such a boomy voice, it was down in the mix. But once I heard it somewhere else, it was like, what? Anyway, but I there's something that happens when you do know something so intimately versus just this kind of more or less a disposable music kind of thing. Yeah. So it's just, it's a double-edged sword. That's all I can think of. Yeah.
We're not going to shape the future. All we can do is watch it and ride it.
So what is next for you?
Well, I've got a few more, bit more traveling to do to kind of present this book and tell people about it. And I've still got to finish the audiobook, and I've got to do the web page with all the links. So I've got lots of stuff to do. But after that, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of, I have a big record collection.
Yeah.
And a lot, I mean, like 6,000 vinyl and like 30,000 CDs. And I've got all these drawers. Chuck away the jewel case, and put it in an envelope with a little label.
Okay.
And so all filed by country. And I did a whole series of podcasts called Joe Boyd's A to Z in the middle of writing this about 7-8 years ago. But they were like 10 minutes with very fragmented little 15 to 30 seconds worth of music, but each on a kind of theme by the letter somehow. Yeah. And they were lots of fun, and people really seem to like them, and it keeps getting, it never stops people visiting and getting more and more hits and everything. And I've thought about expanding that into like a 2-hour show where I play from my record collection and reminisce and tell stories and stuff. And I don't know whether I can end up finding the right platform for that or how to do it, but that's one of the top ideas I have.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
But a lot of my vinyl, an awful lot of some of the best stuff, and I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot, I got not too far from here at Aaron's on Melrose, opposite Fairfax High. Oh. That was a record store. Maybe it'd been gone before your time. But when I was working at Warner Brothers in the film company, because we were part of the same conglomerate as Warner, Elektra, Atlantic, Reprise, I would get all the new releases. Of course, because I was the guy who might put them in a movie, and so I would listen to everything and decide which ones I wanted to keep, and take the ones I didn't want to keep, wait till I had a big pile, go down to Aaron's and give them over. And they'd say, okay, well, for these 30, promos, you can probably give you $100 worth of credit or whatever. Wow. Yeah. And then of course I'd end up spending $200. Of course. But they had a great selection, Aaron's. They were great. They had records from all over the world. They had reissues, jazz, blues, and of course R&B and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff took me a long time to get it back to England somehow. Because it ended up in storage, and then I shipped it when I had a record label. I shipped it all to my warehouse in Connecticut, and then somebody actually pilfered from it. Some guy there stole all my Hendrix and my Van Morrison and my Beatles, and just went through them and fished out, with that, and then closed it all very carefully. And but eventually I got it safely back to London, and now there it is.
And were you buying mostly like new releases, or just some like
a lot of mixture. I mean, I'll buy anything. I've whenever I see something that's interesting, but I'm prejudiced. I like stuff that I know was mastered from tape.
It's an analog medium. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then so where are you still shopping these days?
A little bit. I don't have that much room. So, I do sort of, I do sometimes recycle things that I decide, I don't really need this. And then I'll buy something else. And people give me things, but I listen to them, but very often they're not really keepers. But I digitize them. So I now have but very carefully with WAV files, no MP3s allowed on my big hard drive. And I have tons of cassettes, demos. People sent me things, copies of LPs that people sent me way back in the days when you did that. Yeah. And little by little, I'm going through those and digitizing the best of those. Yeah. And it all goes onto a hard drive.
Like a server kind of thing?
Yeah, just a big hard drive. Yeah. And then I have an old version of iTunes
Okay.
that
Yeah.
it's easy to just
Right.
put it all in alphabetical order by song title and then copy to an iPod like SA through SE,
Yeah.
which is like 2,000 titles or something.
Yeah.
And then Andrea and I listen in alphabetical order, and you hear different versions of the same song
That's
by
so
different
interesting.
artists, and you never know what's coming next.
Right.
And it's a very nice way to listen.
Do you have like any type of visualizer that kind of tells you what's okay?
Well, I mean, you can just look at the
I know, yeah. I mean, like that little device is made in Poland, and that's like a visualizer. It'll tell. Well, actually, it doesn't tell you what's playing, but it creates a waveform based on the audio it hears.
Oh, really? So
yeah,
it's
colorful.
just colorful.
But they have other ones that actually will. I've seen some that actually
That's
will
more
project.
for use when you're stoned or something.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, well, not saying how you should listen to your music,
Right,
but yeah,
right.
no, exactly. Yeah, no, it's super cool. It's
But I've got a tube amp
yes.
and a nice Garrard changer that's,
Oh, you have a changer.
well, not a changer, but a Garrard turntable.
Okay.
That's drilled into the wall with struts, so that
Nice.
if you walk around, it doesn't
Right.
have an effect.
It's
on it.
isolated.
Yeah, it's isolated.
And then what kind of speakers?
I've got some old studio monitors that
Okay, yeah.
that fell my way as when I was mixing a record, and I rented. I didn't like the speakers in the studio, so
Yeah.
I asked them to rent me some. I can't remember the name of them, and they worked just fine. And then at the end, when we finished, I got a call from the studio saying, "You come and collect your speakers. You get them out of here. We want them." I said, "They're not mine. You rented them from somewhere." And they said, "No, we didn't. They're yours." And I said, No, you did. And they called me back and said, "We checked and we didn't rent them. They're yours." Okay. And I came over and collected them, and they've been my speakers ever since.
I was wondering, do you have any, what the kids call today, hot takes, controversial opinions on maybe popular, like an unpopular opinion on something that's...
You just want to get me in trouble.
If you want, no.
No, listen, basically the whole book
Yeah,
is looked at from a certain point of view.
yeah.
People ask how far towards the present day do you go in that
Right.
book? And I had to draw a line somewhere. But I said I didn't really draw a line chronologically. I drew a line technologically.
Right.
The book ends with the drum machine because it's just different.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. And so this book is really about handcrafted rhythm by humans and the history of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. And I do, talk about how, in the last chapter of the book, I talk about how, modern technology, sampling, drum machines, effects, all these things were inspired by the capture of real moments on tape.
Yeah.
Like Kool Herc sitting in the basement in the Bronx with two turntables with the same James Brown record.
Right.
Effectively looping just by playing a drum break
Right.
on one James Brown record, the same drum break on the other drum, and then winding it back and keeping that drum loop thing going. And eventually said, well, that's a lot of trouble to do that, to do all of that. Let's figure out how you can just sample that and repeat that drum fill, because he was doing this thing that nobody had ever heard before, which is toasting over the drum breaks, which in the Bronx they decided to call rapping.
Yeah.
And so that was like a beginning. And I don't know, it's sort of, I just find it sort of strange that so much of this modern digital technology is based on some way of capturing a moment in time which was meant to be ephemeral. It was just a moment in time. It was just that moment where the intensity picks up because of the dancing or because of the way somebody's singing. And somebody says, wow, that was really cool, the way they did that middle eight or whatever. Let's grab it and digitize it, and then we can use it again, and we can do this, and we can sample it. And it's a bit like, driving through a kind of funky area in Appalachia with cars up on cinder blocks being cannibalized for parts. you know, a lot of our music is now being cannibalized for parts. And that, you know, I know that that's an extreme, or it's like a painting a picture in a particular way. And there's other ways of looking at technology as liberating and democratizing music and making it accessible to people in ways that the old way wasn't so possible. But that's the shtick of the book.
The cat's out of the bag. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
And I think it's a great defining moment that you make. And I think, you had to limit yourself, otherwise, you know, you just keep going.
I think whatever, definitely, history moves on, things change. Yeah. But it's good at such a point to look back and document what hasn't necessarily been documented, and tell those stories before they just are plowed under by the waves of history.
Right.
And people can read them and maybe be inspired to do something a little different.
I think that's a great intention behind this book, and I think I hope lots of people read it. I think it's or listen to it with the audiobook.
Yeah.
Before we go, I just have to ask, do you have a favorite Beatles album, and what is it?
I haven't thought about it necessarily.
Yeah.
But I do write in the book about, in the chapter on India,
right.
I write about Revolver was released on my birthday, August 5th, 1966. And I was 24, and I bought myself a birthday present of the Revolver.
Right.
I went to the record store and bought it. Came back. I was opening the London office of Elektra that year, and I just put it on the turntable.
Yeah.
And I just could not stop playing it. You know, I just played it over and over again. It was really, that record changed a lot, I think, and it was sort of a declaration of independence. It was not a record that girls were going to scream to, which was what they wanted in a way, to change the dynamic between them and the audience so that they could actually hear themselves on stage.
Right.
They never really got to.
Right.
But it was clearly a record with that intention, with the Indian influence on both John and George.
And what about the Tomorrow Never Knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, and so, listen, there are lots of tracks that I love about the Beatles, with the Beatles, and obviously in Sgt. Pepper and Rubber Soul, and even the very first ones, you know, which are incredible. You know, those. Yes. I mean, I remember there was a New York disc jockey who, Murray the K, who called himself the fifth Beatle. Right. I remember driving one evening from Boston to New York. It's like a 5-hour drive or something, and I drove, and I just tuned. By the time I got to Hartford or wherever, I could tune in to. Right. And he was just playing one Beatles track after another for the next 2 hours.
Wow.
And it was just so exciting because you just didn't know this stuff. I mean, it was just completely new. This vision, this sort of fresh, I guess, European take on American music. Right. This, you know, with a bit of Irish and different melodies, sensibilities, but just the individual genius. You can't define it by culture and things. Right. It's Lennon and McCartney were just something else, and then there's that track "Girl" that I describe in the book that a Russian guy I met heard by the banks of the Moscow River in 1974, and he said that within the first he didn't know what it was because they never had Beatles. It hadn't been allowed. This was the first Beatles track was ever reproduced on a Russian cassette. And
that's so interesting.
And he said within the first 15 seconds of hearing that, without knowing what it was, he just said, whatever that is, it's the truth. And everything that I've learned up to now has been a lie. And that was the thought he had. And I think the power of music is incredible. Yeah. And that's a good example.
I think you summed it up beautifully right there.
Okay.
I mean, it drives my curiosity. My soul lives on music. I mean, I can't go a day without hearing something, whether it be like an old favorite, something new. It's just like an appetite you can't satisfy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Joe.
All right.
This has been a real pleasure.
Pleasure being
congratulations
here. It's always good to be in a room with plenty of vinyl.
Oh.
It has a kind of benign
Yeah,
wave effect on the ions in the air, I think.
I love that. Thank you, Ed. And it's such an honor. And congratulations on the book. Yeah, so please get a copy. Read it or wait for the audiobook. However you do, you need to get into this book. It's fantastic. If you love history, which you probably do if you watch my channel, it's full of that, and it's written by a great writer. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Joe. I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.